Ambassador Zekthara had seen many species in her 3 centuries of diplomatic service across the Galactic Federation. She had witnessed the crystalline beauty of the Velthari as they sang their cities into existence, marveled at the quantum consciousness of the Nexori, who existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and even negotiated with the ancient Kethmaran hive minds whose collective intelligence spanned entire solar systems. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for her first encounter with humans. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of what the humans called the Sol System. Zekthara's 4 eyes studied the tactical displays with growing unease. What she saw defied every principle of civilized space development she had learned in her centuries of service. "By the eternal void," whispered her aide, Mortex, his translucent blue skin flickering with nervous bioluminescence. "They've militarized everything." The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter wasn't just mined, it was a fortress. Massive railgun platforms stretched across millions of kilometers, their magnetic accelerators capable of hurling projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Mining stations doubled as weapon foundries, their industrial capacity turned toward creating instruments of war. Automated defense drones swarmed in formations that would make a seasoned admiral weep. But it was the space around Earth itself that truly stunned the diplomatic party. Luna's surface bristled with defensive installations. Orbital rings around Earth hummed with energy shields and weapon systems. Even the planet's weather satellites have been modified to serve dual purposes, weather monitoring and early warning systems. "How many wars are they fighting?" Mortex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zekthara consulted her briefing materials again, certain she had missed something. "According to our intelligence, they're not currently at war with anyone. This is their peacetime configuration." The implications sent a chill through her thorax. Every other species in the galaxy had achieved spaceflight through cooperation, unity, and the peaceful application of their best minds. The humans had apparently achieved it through an arms race with themselves. Captain Techysala of the Harmony's Edge approached their observation station. The tall, ethereal Erthani moved with the fluid grace typical of her species, but her usually calm demeanor showed cracks of concern. "Ambassador, we're receiving multiple targeting locks from their defensive systems. Should I activate our diplomatic immunity beacon?" "Do it," Zekthara replied immediately, "and broadcast our peaceful intentions on all frequencies." The response came faster than she expected. A human voice, speaking in heavily accented but understandable galactic standard, crackled through their communication systems. "Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Solar Defense Command. State your business in Sol Space." Zekthara activated the communication array personally. "Admiral Chun, this is Ambassador Zekthara of the Galactic Federation. We come seeking peaceful contact with your species, as outlined in the first contact protocols established by the Hold That Thought," the human interrupted. "You said Galactic Federation. Are you telling me there's already a government for the galaxy, and nobody thought to send us an invitation?" The casual tone caught Zekthara off guard. In her experience, first contact was always a momentous occasion, treated with appropriate gravity and ceremony. This human spoke as if she were discussing dinner plans. "Well, Admiral, the Federation typically makes contact once a species achieves faster-than-light travel and demonstrates certain levels of—" "Yeah, about that," Admiral Chun interrupted again. "Our long-range sensors picked up your ship about 6 hours ago. Want to tell me how you got past our outer perimeter without us detecting you until you were practically on top of us?" Mortex leaned over to whisper in Zekthara's ear. "Should we explain quantum phase shifting?" Zekthara considered this. Most species required centuries to develop the mathematics necessary to understand basic FTL theory. "Admiral, our propulsion system operates on principles that your scientists might not yet have. Try us," came the immediate response, and Zekthara could swear she heard eagerness in the human's voice. Against her better judgment, she launched into a basic explanation of quantum phase shifting, dimensional folding, and the manipulation of space-time geometries. She kept it simple, using concepts that any spacefaring civilization should understand. The silence that followed stretched long enough that she wondered if the communication link had failed. Then, Admiral Chin's voice returned, but now she was clearly speaking to someone else. "Dr. Petrov, did you catch all that? What's your assessment?" A new voice joined the conversation, older, with a different accent. Fascinating. Their phase variance suggests they're manipulating quantum foam structures. Sarah, if we could adapt our gravity drives to create similar quantum tunneling effects. Already working on it, came a third voice, younger, and speaking rapid fire. Give me 6 hours, and I'll have a prototype dimensional fold generator ready for testing. Zekthara's 4 eyes widened in shock. She had just described technology that had taken her own species 800 years to develop, and these humans were already discussing improvements. Admiral, she said carefully, perhaps we should arrange a formal meeting. There are protocols for first contact that absolutely, Admiral Chen agreed. We'll meet you at Luna Base 7. Fair warning, though, you'll need to submit to scanning procedures. We've had some unpleasant experiences with uninvited visitors. Unpleasant experiences? Zekthara asked. Pirates, mostly. Also probe ships from species who thought they could scout our defenses without us noticing. A few seemed to think primitive humans would make good slaves or research subjects. The casual way the Admiral mentioned these threats sent another chill through Zekthara. What happened to these uninvited visitors? Oh, we sent them home, Admiral Chen replied pleasantly. Well, most of them. The ones who survived the experience, anyway. As the Harmony's Edge approached Luna Base 7 under escort from 6 human fighter craft, Zekthara studied the vessels surrounding them. The human ships were smaller than anything in the Federation fleet, but they moved with predatory grace. Their hulls were scarred from battle, their weapon systems were clearly well-maintained, and, most disturbing of all, they flew in perfect formation without any apparent communication between them. How are they coordinating? Mortexu under the load. Captain HFY Ala had been monitoring human communication frequencies. They're not, she reported with growing unease. No tactical communications at all. They're flying in formation through pure instinct. Luna Base 7 sprawled across the moon's surface like a metallic cancer, all sharp angles and defensive positions. As their shuttle descended toward the landing bay, Zekthara could see construction crews working around the clock, always building, always improving, always preparing for the next threat. The landing bay itself was a marvel of engineering efficiency. Magnetic clamps secured their shuttle with precision, while atmospheric shields sealed the space. But what caught her attention were the other vessels in the bay, ships from at least a dozen different species, all showing signs of recent modification. Ambassador, her security chief, Vextar, said quietly, those ships have been retrofitted with human weapons systems. Before she could respond, the airlock cycled, and Admiral Chun strode into view. She was smaller than Zekthara had expected. Most humans seemed to be, but she carried herself with absolute confidence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her uniform was clean but showed signs of regular use. Ambassador Zekthara, Admiral Chen said, extending her hand in what Zekthara knew was a human greeting gesture. Welcome to Seoul. I apologize for the security measures, but we've learned to be careful. Zekthara accepted the handshake, noting the controlled strength in the human's grip. No apology necessary, Admiral. Your reputation for caution has apparently spread throughout the galaxy. Admiral Chen's eyebrows rose. Has it now? And what exactly is our reputation? Dangerous, Zekthara admitted. The few species who have encountered humans describe you as unpredictable, violent, extremely adaptable to new technologies. Huh, Admiral Chen said, leading them through corridors lined with defensive positions. I suppose that's fair. We tend to assume anything new might try to kill us until proven otherwise. Has served us well so far. They passed through several security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. Zekthara noticed that every corridor could be sealed and defended. Every intersection was covered by automated weapons, and the very air seemed to hum with barely contained energy. Admiral, may I ask about the modifications we observed to non-human vessels in your landing bay? Admiral Chen nodded easily. Trade agreements. Species bring us their ships. We upgrade their defensive capabilities in exchange for technology, resources, or information. Mutual benefit. And they're willing to let you modify their vessels? Willing. Admiral Chen laughed. Ambassador, most of them beg us to upgrade their ships. Turns out, when word gets around that human-modified vessels have never lost a fight against pirates, demand increases significantly. They entered a conference room with a view of Earth hanging in the black sky above. The sight should have been peaceful, But Zekthara could see the orbital defense platforms even with the naked eye. Before we begin formal negotiations, Admiral Chen said, I need to ask you something. How many species in your Federation have ever fought a war? Zekthara considered the question carefully. Very few. Perhaps a dozen have histories of conflict, but that was before they achieved spaceflight. The process of reaching the stars typically unifies a species around common goals. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. That explains a lot. How many have fought wars against other spacefaring species? None, Zekthara admitted. The Federation's charter explicitly prohibits armed conflict between member species. Disputes are resolved through arbitration and how's that working out? Admiral Chen interrupted. Any problems with pirates, raiders, slavers, or other species who didn't get the memo about peaceful coexistence? Zekthara felt her confidence wavering. Well, there have been some incidents. Non-Federation species sometimes engage in illegal activities, but our security forces handle such matters. Your security forces, Admiral Chen repeated. Tell me about them. The Federation Peacekeeping Corps is composed of volunteers from member species. They undergo extensive training in nonviolent conflict resolution and are equipped with non-lethal restraint systems designed to— Admiral Chen held up a hand. Non-lethal restraint systems. Against species armed with military-grade weapons. The philosophy is that violence only breeds more violence, Zekthara said, though the words fell hollow in this room surrounded by weapons and defenses. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the window, gazing out at Earth. Ambassador, can I tell you about humanity's philosophy on violence? Zekthara nodded, though she was beginning to suspect she wouldn't like what she heard. We've learned that violence is a tool, like any other. It can be used constructively or destructively. The key is knowing when to use it and how much to apply. She turned back to face the diplomatic party. We also learned that the best way to avoid violence is to be so obviously capable of it that nobody wants to test you. But, surely, more Techs interjected, there must be better ways to resolve conflicts than through the threat of force. Admiral Chen's smile was predatory. Oh, there are. And we use them whenever possible. Negotiation, trade, mutual benefit, cultural exchange. We're big fans of peaceful solutions. But when someone shows up in our space with weapons charged and demands our surrender, well, she shrugged. Peaceful solutions require peaceful people. Dr. Petrov entered the room at that moment, carrying a tablet covered in complex equations. Sarah, I've got the preliminary analysis of their propulsion system. You need to see this. Admiral Chen studied the data for a moment, then looked up at Zekthara with an expression of intense interest. Ambassador, your people have had FDL travel for how long? Approximately 2,000 years, Zekthara replied. And in all that time, have you made any significant improvements to the basic drive system? Well, no. The technology reached theoretical perfection centuries ago. There was no need for theoretical perfection, Dr. Petrov interrupted, his excitement barely contained. According to your own data, your drives operate at 67% efficiency. We've identified at least 12 potential improvements just from your basic specifications. Zekthara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. That's impossible. Our greatest scientists have studied FTL theory for millennia. Admiral Chen and Dr. Petrov exchanged glances. Ambassador, the Admiral said gently, when was the last time your people fought a war? Over 3,000 years ago, Zekthara replied automatically. And when did you achieve spaceflight? 2,000 years ago. Admiral Chen nodded. There's your problem. You stopped innovating because you stopped facing existential threats. Your people achieved peace and prosperity, which is wonderful, but it also removed the evolutionary pressure that drives technological advancement. Humans, Dr. Petrov added, have been at war with someone for basically our entire recorded history. We've never had the luxury of assuming our technology was good enough. Zekthara struggled to process this information. Are you saying that conflict is necessary for technological progress? Not necessary, Admiral Chen corrected. But it sure helps. Nothing motivates innovation like knowing your life depends on being smarter, faster, and more adaptable than the other guy. Through the window, Zekthara could see human ships moving through space with purpose and precision. Each vessel was different, clearly modified, and upgraded based on lessons learned from actual combat experience. They weren't beautiful like Federation ships, with their elegant curves and artistic flourishes. Human ships were functional, practical, deadly. Admiral, she said slowly, your species has been in space for less than 2 centuries. How many other spacefaring civilizations have you encountered? 47. Admiral Chun replied immediately. 43 of them are now trading partners or allies. 3 tried to conquer us and learned better. 1. She paused, and for the first time, Zekthara saw something that might have been regret in the human's eyes. 1 left us no choice but total war. What happened to them? Admiral Chin met her gaze steadily. They don't exist anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Zekthara realized she was looking at a species that had not only survived first contact with dozens of alien civilizations, but had thrived. They hadn't just adapted to the dangers of space, they had mastered them. The Kathmori Empire, Dr. Petrov said quietly. They believed humans were a primitive species suitable only for slavery. They attacked our outer colonies without warning, killed millions of civilians, and demanded our unconditional surrender. We tried negotiation, Admiral Chen added. We offered them everything we could think of: technology, resources, territory. They weren't interested in coexistence. So you destroyed them, Mortek said, his bioluminescence flickering with fear. We defended ourselves, Admiral Chen corrected. They made the choice to fight to extinction rather than accept peaceful coexistence. We simply accommodated their choice. Zekthara found herself reevaluating everything she thought she knew about human nature. These weren't mindless warmongers or savage barbarians. They were a species that had learned to survive in a universe that didn't care about their hopes and dreams. Ambassador, Admiral Chen said, settling back into her chair, tell me about Federation space. How safe is it for peaceful traders and explorers? The question caught Zekthara off guard. It's reasonably safe. There are occasional incidents, but nothing our peacekeeping forces can't handle. Define occasional incidents. Zekthara consulted her personal datapad. In the past standard year, there were approximately 12,000 reported attacks on civilian vessels for 173 colony raids and 2,714 instances of what your people might call piracy. The number sounded worse when she said them out loud. Admiral Chun whistled softly. 15,000 violent crimes against civilians in 1 year, and your peacekeeping forces handle it. They do their best, Zekthara said defensively. The Federation spans 12,000 star systems. It's impossible to protect everyone all the time. No, Admiral Chin agreed. It is impossible to protect everyone all the time. That's why you teach people to protect themselves. She gestured toward the window, where Earth hung in space like a blue-white jewel surrounded by steel thorns. Every human settlement, every colony, every trading station, they're all capable of defending themselves. We don't wait for help to arrive. We don't hope the bad guys will go away. We make sure that attacking human civilians is the last mistake anyone ever makes. Dr. Petrov pulled up holographic displays showing human settlements throughout the Sol system and beyond. Each one bristled with defensive capabilities. Mining stations carried enough firepower to cripple a battle cruiser. Agricultural colonies were protected by orbital defense platforms. Even scientific research stations were armed and ready for trouble. You militarized everything, Vextar observed. We protected everything, Admiral Chin corrected. There's a difference. We don't go looking for fights, but we make sure we're ready when fights come looking for us. And they do come looking, Dr. Petrov added grimly. When word gets out that there's a new spacefaring species, every raider and slaver in the galaxy shows up to see what they can steal. We learned that lesson the hard way. Zekthara was beginning to understand why the human reputation had spread so quickly through the galaxy's underworld. Any species that could turn asteroid mining operations into fortress systems and agricultural colonies into military bases represented a threat unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Admiral, may I ask how many humans serve in your military forces? Admiral Chun considered the question. That depends how you define military. We have about 50 million people in the regular armed forces, but every human settlement maintains its own defense force. Every cargo ship carries weapons and trained fighters. Every colony has a militia. She paused to let the numbers sink in. If you're asking how many humans could fight if they had to, the answer is all of them. Every human over the age of 16 receives basic military training. We learn to shoot, to fight, to maintain equipment, and to work as a team under pressure. It's not because we love war. It's because we love freedom. The implications were staggering. Zekthera was looking at a species where the entire population was essentially military reserves. No wonder their reputation had spread so quickly. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. Admiral Chun touched a control on her wrist device and listened to a brief, coded message. Her expression grew serious. "Ambassador, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut this meeting short. We've got a situation developing in the outer system." "What kind of situation?" Admiral Chin stood, already shifting into command mode. "The kind where someone who should know better is about to learn why attacking humans is a really bad idea." Humans strode purposefully through corridors that suddenly buzzed with activity. Alert klaxons had begun sounding. Not the panicked wailing she might have expected, but steady, measured tones that spoke of disciplined preparation. "Admiral," she called out, struggling to keep pace with the human's ground-eating stride. "Perhaps my delegation should return to our ship until no time," Admiral Chin replied without slowing. "And, honestly, Ambassador, you wanted to understand humans. This is your chance to see us in action." They entered what was clearly a command center, and Zekthera stopped short at the sight that greeted her. The room hummed with barely controlled energy as dozens of humans worked at stations displaying tactical data from across the Sol system. Holographic displays showed ship movements, energy signatures, and what could only be weapon systems coming online. But what struck her most was the atmosphere. There was no panic, no fear, no desperate shouting. The humans worked with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Their voices were steady, their movements precise, and their eyes held the focus of predators who had just spotted prey. "Situation report," Admiral Chin demanded as she took her position at the central command station. "Unknown fleet dropped out of hyperspace 6 hours ago at the edge of the Kuiper Belt," reported a young human with lieutenant's insignia. 47 vessels, mix of cruiser and frigate class. They've been conducting what appears to be reconnaissance sweeps of our outer installations. Admiral Chin's jaw tightened. IFF signatures? No response to identification requests. Ship designs match known Vaktheri raider configurations, but they're flying under no recognized flag. Zekthera felt her heart sink. The Vaktheri were one of the species she had hoped never to encounter during her diplomatic career. Ruthless, technologically advanced, and completely without honor, they treated other sapient beings as resources to be harvested. "Admiral," she said urgently, "if those are Vaktheri ships, you need to contact the Federation immediately. They have advanced weaponry and typically travel in much larger fleets. This could be the advance guard for a major invasion force." Admiral Chun turned to study the tactical display more carefully. 47 ships. If they're scouts for a larger force, how many ships might we be looking at? The Vaktheri rarely deploy fewer than 500 vessels for a major operation, Zekthera replied. Their last confirmed raid involved over 1,000 ships and resulted in the destruction of 3 colony worlds. The command center had gone very quiet. Zekthera realized that every human in the room was now listening to their conversation. Admiral Chin nodded slowly. "And how did the Federation respond to that raid?" A stern diplomatic protest was filed. Economic sanctions were imposed. The matter was referred to the Galactic Court for how many Vaktheri ships were destroyed. Dr. Petrov interrupted. "Well, none. The Federation doesn't engage in military actions unless... So they killed millions of beings, destroyed 3 worlds, and faced no consequences," Admiral Chin said flatly. "The diplomatic and economic pressure was significant," Zekthera protested weakly. "I'm sure it was." Admiral Chun turned back to the tactical display. "Lieutenant Morrison, what's the status of our outer perimeter defenses?" "All automated platforms are online and armed. The asteroid fortifications are reporting full readiness. Mining Platform 7 has begun evacuating non-essential personnel." "Belay that evacuation order," Admiral Chun said sharply. "If we start evacuating, it tells them we're afraid. Signal all platforms to maintain normal operations, but go to Condition 2. "Yes, ma'am." Zekthera watched in fascination as the human command structure functioned. Orders were given clearly, acknowledged immediately, and carried out without question. There was no debate, no committee discussion, no request for clarification. Just smooth, efficient action. "Admiral," called out another officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet." "Put it through." The main display shimmered, and Zekthara found herself looking at a face that brought back nightmares from her academy training. Vakthari were reptilian in appearance, with scaled skin that ranged from dark green to black, yellow eyes that never seemed to blink, and a mouth full of serrated teeth. But it was their expression that truly unsettled her, the cold calculation of a predator studying prey. "Greetings, humans," the Vakthari commander said, his voice carrying the sibilant accent of his species. "I am War Leader SSK Talk of the Crimson Fleet. You have built impressive installations in this system. We are prepared to accept your surrender and spare your lives in exchange for tribute." Admiral Chin's expression didn't change. "Tribute. 50% of your manufactured goods, 70% of your agricultural output, and 200,000 of your people for our labor markets. These terms are generous. Accept them, or we will take what we want by force." The command center had gone dead silent. Zekthara could feel the tension in the air like a physical weight. Admiral Chin leaned back in her chair and smiled. The expression was cold enough to freeze helium. "War Leader SSK Talk, I'm Admiral Sarah Chun of the Solar Defense Command. Let me make you a counteroffer. You're not in a position to negotiate, human." "Sure I am." Admiral Chin's smile widened. "Here's my offer. You have exactly 1 hour to leave our space. Any ship that remains after that deadline will be destroyed." SSK Talk's eyes widened in apparent surprise before narrowing dangerously. "You face 47 warships with weapons that have reduced entire worlds to ash. Do you not understand your situation?" "Oh, I understand it perfectly," Admiral Chin replied. "The question is, do you understand yours?" Before SSK Talk could respond, Admiral Chun cut the transmission. The command center erupted in controlled activity as officers began implementing what were clearly pre-established battle plans. "Admiral," Zekthara said urgently, "you can't seriously be considering fighting them. The Vakthari have destroyed fleets 10 times larger than anything humanity could field." Admiral Chun was studying multiple data streams simultaneously. "Ambassador, how many times have the Vakthari fought humans? This would be the first encounter, but then, how do they know what humanity can't field?" The question caught Zekthara off guard. Before she could formulate a response, Lieutenant Morrison spoke up. "Admiral, the Vakthari fleet is moving toward the inner system. Estimated time to Mars orbital zone, 14 hours. Good. That gives us time to set up properly." Admiral Chun touched several controls, and new displays materialized around the command center. "Signal all fleet elements to implement Protocol 7. I want those bastards to see exactly what they're walking into." Zekthara watched in amazement as the Sol system transformed before her eyes. What had seemed like a reasonable number of defensive installations suddenly revealed itself as merely the tip of an iceberg. Asteroid mining operations reconfigured themselves into weapon platforms. Seemingly innocent cargo vessels shed their outer hulls to reveal military-grade armaments. Space stations that had appeared to be research facilities powered up energy weapons that made Zekthara's fur stand on end. "By the eternal void," whispered Mortex. "How many ships do you have?" Dr. Petrov answered without looking up from his calculations. "Define ship. Every human vessel larger than a personal transport carries some level of armament. Our cargo haulers mount anti-piracy systems that would make most military vessels weep. Our exploration ships are designed to fight their way out of trouble. Even our scientific research platforms can hold their own in a firefight. But surely you don't have enough vessels to match 47 Vakthari warships," Zekthara protested. Admiral Chun finally looked up from her displays. "Ambassador, we don't need to match them. We need to kill them." The casual way she said it sent chills through Zekthara's entire body. "Signal all civilian vessels to clear the engagement zone," Admiral Chin continued. "I want a minimum safe distance of 10 million kilometers. And give me a direct line to President Martinez." "Admiral," Lieutenant Morrison reported, "the President is standing by." A new window opened on the display, showing a human woman with graying hair and tired eyes. Zekthara recognized her as Elena Martinez, the current leader of the human government. "Sarah, I've been briefed on the situation. What do you need?" "Authorization for a Type 4 response," Admiral Chun said simply. President Martinez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Admiral, are you certain these hostiles represent an existential threat to human civilian populations?" "Madam President, Vac theory doctrine calls for the systematic enslavement or elimination of conquered species. They have explicitly demanded tribute in the form of 200,000 human beings. In my professional opinion, they represent the exact type of threat that Type 4 protocols were designed to address. President Martinez nodded slowly. Then, you have full authorization. God help them, and God help us all. The transmission ended, and Admiral Chun turned to address the command center. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now operating under Type 4 protocols. All weapon systems are authorized for unrestricted use. Rules of engagement are simple. Anything that doesn't surrender immediately is a legitimate target. Any questions? There were none. Zekthara found her voice. Admiral, what are Type 4 protocols? Admiral Chin's expression had gone completely cold. Type 4 protocols are reserved for threats to human civilization itself. Under Type 4, there are no rules except survival. But surely there are conventions, treaties, agreements about the conduct of space warfare. Ambassador Dr. Petrov interrupted gently. Humans wrote most of those conventions after we'd already learned how to wage war in space. We know exactly how much they're worth when someone is trying to exterminate your species. Lieutenant Morrison cleared his throat. Admiral, we're detecting movement from the Vac theory fleet. They're breaking formation and spreading out in what appears to be a standard attack pattern. Time to engagement? At current speed, approximately 8 hours. Admiral Chin nodded. That's perfect. Signal Fleet Admiral Harrison aboard the Unconquerable. Tell him he is authorized to begin Operation Thunderstorm. Yes, ma'am. Zekthara watched as new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Human ships were moving throughout the system, but not in any formation she recognized. Instead of massing for a traditional fleet engagement, they seemed to be positioning themselves for ambush. Admiral, your ships are scattering. Surely you want to concentrate your firepower. Admiral Chin's smile returned, and Zekthara was beginning to understand why so many species found humans terrifying. Ambassador, we've been studying warfare for 6,000 years. We've fought on land, on sea, in air, and now in space. One thing we've learned is that the enemy gets a vote in how the battle goes. She gestured to the tactical display, where Vac theory ships were indeed moving in a standard attack formation that would have been effective against most species' defensive positions. The Vac theory are good fighters, but they're predictable. They use the same tactics that have worked against everyone else in the galaxy. The problem is, we're not everyone else. As if to emphasize her point, the first phase of the human plan began to unfold. What had appeared to be empty space around the approaching Vac theory fleet suddenly came alive with activity. Cloaked mines activated, revealing themselves just long enough to launch clouds of micromissiles. Stealth drones that had been drifting like debris opened fire with precision laser arrays. Asteroid-mounted railguns began hurling projectiles along carefully calculated trajectories. The Vac theory fleet found itself under attack from every direction simultaneously. Impossible d'arrêter. How did you get weapons into position without their sensors detecting them? We've been preparing for this kind of fight for decades, Admiral Chin replied, watching as the first Vac theory shield began failing under the coordinated assault. Every time we met a new species, we asked ourselves, how we fight them if we had to. We studied their ships, their tactics, their weaknesses. The tactical display showed devastating precision. Human weapons weren't just hitting the Vac theory ships. They were hitting specific systems. Engines, weapon mounts, shield generators, communication arrays. The attackers weren't trying to destroy the enemy fleet. They were systematically crippling it. My God, Mortex whispered, his bioluminescence strobing in panic. They're not just winning. They're dissecting them. War leader SSK Talk's face appeared on the communication display again, but now his composure was cracking. Battle damage was visible in the background, and his ship was clearly taking heavy fire. Humans, this is impossible. Our sensors show no ships in attack position. Admiral Chen leaned forward. War leader, let me explain something about humans. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. Our shields are failing. How are you targeting our vulnerabilities with such precision? Because we know your ships better than you do, Admiral Chan replied calmly. We've studied every Vac theory vessel that's ever been captured or salvaged. We know exactly where your weak points are, exactly how much punishment your systems can take, and exactly how to make you stop being a threat. The Vac theory commander's eyes were wide, with something approaching panic. This is not how space combat works. Where are your ships? Why won't you fight honorably? Admiral Chen's laugh was without humor. Honor? You came here demanding slaves, and you want to lecture us about honor? War leader, the only honor in combat is survival. Explosions began cascading through the Vactheri formation as disabled ships collided with each other or fell victim to secondary weapon systems. The Raiders' tight attack formation had become a liability as human weapons turned the formation's geometry against itself. But surely, Zekthra said, her voice barely above a whisper, you'll accept their surrender when they ask for it? Admiral Chun turned to look at her directly. Ambassador, do you know how many species have surrendered to the Vactheri over the centuries? Hundreds, I would think. And do you know how many of those species still exist as free peoples? Zekthra felt her heart sink. None. Exactly. The Vactheri don't believe in prisoners or mercy. They believe in conquest and slavery. So we're going to teach them a lesson they won't forget. But if you destroy their entire fleet, won't that bring their full military might down on human space? Admiral Chen's smile was now genuinely predatory. Ambassador, that's exactly what we're hoping for. The implications of that statement hit Zekthra like a physical blow. You want them to escalate? You want a full-scale war? We want to end the Vactheri threat permanently, Dr. Petrov said, not looking up from his tactical calculations. They've been raiding and enslaving peaceful species for centuries. Someone has to stop them. But the casualties, the destruction, surely there must be a peaceful solution, Ambassador. Admiral Chen interrupted. How many peaceful solutions have been tried with the Vactheri? Zekthra consulted her memory of briefing materials. Dozens. Trade agreements, territorial concessions, tribute arrangements, diplomatic immunity treaties. And how many worked? None, Zekthra admitted in a small voice. That's because you can't negotiate with a species that views every other form of life as either a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to be removed. The only language the Vactheri understand is force. On the tactical display, the Vactheri formation was collapsing completely. Ships were breaking ranks, trying to flee back toward the edge of the system, but they found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had somehow positioned themselves perfectly to cut off retreat. War leader SSK Talk appeared one final time, his ship clearly dying around him. Humans, what are you? Admiral Chun leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of her entire species. We are the species that says enough. We are the people who decided that predators like you have had free reign long enough. We are the children of a world that taught us that sometimes the only way to have peace is to be better at war than anyone who wants to take it from you. The transmission cut out as SSK Talk's flagship finally succumbed to the sustained barrage. In less than 4 hours, 47 Vactheri warships had been reduced to debris and disabled hulks. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. Signal all units, she commanded. Begin Phase 2 of Operation Thunderstorm. I want tracking beacons placed on every piece of wreckage larger than a shuttle. When the Vactheri send their main fleet to investigate, I want to know exactly when and where they arrive. Admiral, Lieutenant Morrison reported, we're detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Looks like at least 3 ships managed to escape. Admiral Chen nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. Let them run home with news of what happened here. Let them tell their masters that humans cannot be raided, cannot be enslaved, and will not be intimidated. Zekthra stared at the tactical display showing the destroyed Vactheri fleet. In her centuries of diplomatic service, she had never seen anything like what she had just witnessed. The humans hadn't just defended themselves. They had orchestrated a perfect trap that turned the raiders' own aggression against them. Admiral, she said slowly, how long have you been planning for this kind of encounter? Since the day we met our first hostile species, Admiral Chen replied. We learned very quickly that the galaxy is full of predators. So we decided to become the apex predator. Dr. Petrov was already working on analysis of the captured Vactheri technology. Sarah, you're going to love this. Their shield generators are at least 40 years behind our current systems, and their weapons are designed for intimidation rather than effectiveness. No wonder they've never faced serious resistance. Admiral Chen nodded. Most species probably surrender as soon as they see the fleet size. They never get the chance to realize that Vactheri technology is all show and no substance. But surely, Zekthra protested, this level of preparation, this degree of militarization, It must require enormous resources. How do you maintain an economy while dedicating so much to defense? Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. Ambassador, defense spending isn't just an expense, it's an investment. Every credit we spend on weapons and training is a credit we don't have to spend rebuilding destroyed colonies or ransoming enslaved populations. She gestured to a new display showing human economic data. Our military industries drive innovation that benefits civilian sectors. Our defense research produces technologies that improve life for everyone. Our citizen soldiers are also our engineers, scientists, farmers, and artists. We haven't militarized our society. We've made our society capable of defending itself. Zekthara was beginning to understand that everything she thought she knew about sustainable civilization was wrong. The Federation's model of peaceful coexistence only worked because species like humanity were willing to use violence to protect that peace. Admiral, she said quietly, what happens now? Admiral Chun was already turning her attention to new displays showing long-range sensor data. Now we wait for the VAC theory to make their next move. And while we wait, we get ready for the real fight. The real fight. Admiral Chen's smile returned, cold and anticipatory. Ambassador, this was just the opening round. The VAC theory don't accept defeat. They escalate until they win or until they're completely destroyed. And we've just given them a very public humiliation that they can't ignore. She pulled up projections showing VAC theory fleet deployment patterns. Within 6 months, they'll be back with everything they can muster. Thousands of ships, their best commanders, their most advanced weapons. They'll try to make an example of humanity that will terrify the rest of the galaxy into submission. And you're prepared for that? Admiral Chen's eyes held the light of a predator anticipating prey. Ambassador, we've been preparing for that fight since before we left our home planet. The question isn't whether we're ready. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what happens when you back humans into a corner. Zekthara looked around the command center, where humans continued to work with calm efficiency despite having just fought and won a major space battle. These weren't the primitive warriors she had expected to find. They were something far more dangerous. They were civilized people who had never forgotten how to be savage when survival was at stake. And for the first time since arriving in soul space, she began to understand why the heavens themselves might learn to dread the children of Earth. 3 months had passed since the VAC theory defeat, and Ambassador Zekthara found herself permanently stationed at Luna Bay 7, officially to oversee diplomatic relations between the Federation and humanity, but truthfully because she had become completely fascinated by these impossible beings who had turned everything she knew about galactic civilization upside down. The base had changed dramatically during her stay. What had already been an impressive military installation had transformed into something approaching a fortress world. Human engineers worked around the clock, expanding defensive positions, improving weapon systems, and preparing for the inevitable VAC theory response. But it wasn't the military preparations that amazed her. It was how human society continued to function normally despite living under the shadow of impending war. Ambassador, called Dr. Sarah Kim, a human xenobiologist who had become something approaching a friend during Zekthara's extended stay. Would you like to join us for the morning briefing? Zekthara had attended hundreds of these briefings now, and she never ceased to be amazed by their scope. Where most species would focus exclusively on military preparations when facing existential threats, humans somehow managed to maintain simultaneous focus on defense, science, diplomacy, economics, and cultural development. The briefing room was packed with representatives from every human department imaginable. Military officers sat beside civilian engineers, xenobiologists shared tables with economists, and diplomatic personnel worked alongside intelligence analysts. It was organized chaos that somehow produced coherent results. Admiral Chun took her usual position at the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now 93 days post-contact with hostile VAC theory forces. Intelligence estimates suggest their response fleet will arrive within 30 to 60 days. Status reports, please. General Marcus Rodriguez, the head of Sol System Defense, stood first. All defensive installations are operating at 120% of previous capacity. The new kinetic barriers around Mars are operational. Earth's orbital defense grid has been expanded by 40%, and we've completed deployment of the outer system interdiction fields. Zekthara leaned forward with interest. The interdiction fields were human innovation that had impressed even Federation engineers. By creating localized space-time distortions, they could force incoming ships out of hyperspace at predetermined locations, essentially creating a controlled choke point where human defenses could focus their fire. Excellent. Admiral Chen nodded. Dr. Petrov, what's the status of our technological integration projects? Dr. Petrov consulted his tablet. We've successfully reverse-engineered vac theory shield technology and integrated it with our own systems. The result is a hybrid design that's approximately 300% more effective than either system alone. We're also making progress on their energy weapons, though their plasma containment systems are crude. Crude how? They rely on brute force rather than elegant solutions. Their weapons use 10 times more energy than necessary to achieve the same effect as our systems. It's like they've never heard of efficiency optimization. Admiral Chun made notes on her personal display. Can we use that against them? Absolutely. Their weapons have significant power draw spikes that we can detect and predict. We can anticipate their firing cycles and coordinate our responses accordingly. Dr. Kim raised her hand. Admiral, I've completed my analysis of vac theory psychology based on the crew remains recovered from the destroyed ships. What did you find? They're fascinating from a xenopsychology perspective. Their brain structure suggests they're incapable of what humans would recognize as empathy. They literally cannot comprehend why another being would fight to defend something other than their own immediate genetic line. Admiral Chen's eyebrows rose. Are you saying they can't understand altruism? More than that, they can't understand why humans would risk themselves to protect other species, why we'd share technology with allies, or why we keep fighting when retreat would save our individual lives. To them, our behavior is genuinely incomprehensible. Zekthara found herself speaking up. Dr. Kim, that might explain why they've been so successful against other species. Most galactic civilizations operate on principles of mutual benefit and rational self-interest. If the vac theory can't understand those principles. Exactly, Dr. Kim agreed. They've been winning because they're fighting opponents who assume their enemies think like they do. But humans have experience fighting enemies who don't share our values or motivations. Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's valuable intelligence. Colonel Williams, what's the status of our alliance-building efforts? Colonel Patricia Williams, the head of Human Diplomatic Military Liaison, stood to address the room. We've now established formal defense agreements with 14 species, informal cooperation pacts with 23 more, and technology sharing arrangements with 38 different civilizations. Zekthara was shocked. 38? How did you manage to contact so many species so quickly? Colonel Williams smiled. Word travels fast in the galactic community, Ambassador. When news spread that humans had destroyed a vac theory raid fleet, suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to us. But surely the Federation regulations regarding contact with pre-approved species don't apply to us, Admiral Chen interrupted. We're not Federation members, so we're not bound by Federation rules about who we can or can't talk to. Dr. Petrov brought up a holographic map of local galactic space. Ambassador, you'll find this interesting. The species that have approached us aren't just random contacts. They're all civilizations that have been victims of vac theory raids in the past. The map was illuminated with dozens of star systems, each marked with symbols indicating different species and the dates of vac theory attacks against them. By the eternal void, more text whispered from beside Zekthara. They've been systematically terrorizing this entire region for centuries. And the Federation did nothing, asked Lieutenant Commander Jessica Park, a young human officer. The Federation filed protests, Zekthara said weakly. Economic sanctions were imposed. Diplomatic pressure was ignored, Admiral Chen finished. Because predators don't respond to diplomatic pressure. They respond to strength. Colonel Williams activated new sections of the map. What's really interesting is the pattern of attacks. The vac theory have been specifically targeting species that might pose a future threat to their expansion. Advanced civilizations get hit first before they can develop effective defenses. It's a smart strategy, admitted General Rodriguez. Hit your future enemies while they're weak, then use their resources to hit the next target. Eventually, you're strong enough that nobody can oppose you. Admiral Chen studied the data carefully. Except they made one critical mistake. They waited too long to hit us. Dr. Kim pulled up biological and technological assessment data. Every species they've successfully conquered was contacted within 50 years of achieving spaceflight. Humans have been in space for over 2 centuries. We've had time to develop, to learn, to prepare. More importantly, added Dr. Petrov, we've had time to make friends. The truth of that statement became clear as the briefing continued. Representatives from allied species began joining the discussion via holographic projection, turning the human briefing into an impromptu Galactic Council of War. The first to appear was Admiral HFY Stories of the Earthborn Republic, a graceful being whose species had lost an entire colony world to Vakthari raiders 3 decades earlier. Admiral Chun, our battle fleets are moving into position as discussed. 27 ships are now in the outer approaches to your system. Next came General Kekstani of the Hrothgar clans, a massive, bear-like creature whose people have been fighting Vakthari raiders for generations. Human Admiral Chun, the Hrothgar brings 68 warships and the promise of glorious battle. We have waited long for this revenge. One by one, representatives from dozens of species checked in, reporting fleet movements, shared intelligence, and resource commitments. Zekthara realized she was watching the formation of an alliance unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Admiral, she said during a brief pause in the reporting, you've assembled a coalition of every species that has reason to hate the Vakthari. Not just hate them, Admiral Chen corrected. Every species that understands are next on the target list if the Vakthari aren't stopped. Colonel Williams brought up strategic assessment charts. The beautiful thing about this alliance is that everyone benefits immediately. We're not asking anyone to fight our fight. We're offering them a chance to solve their own Vakthari problem permanently. General Techislack's image flickered as she leaned forward. Admiral Chun, there is something my people must know. When the Vakthari main fleet arrives, it will likely number in the thousands. Even with our combined forces, we will be outnumbered significantly. Admiral Chen's smile was completely confident. General, has your species ever heard the human saying about bringing a knife to a gunfight? I'm not familiar with this phrase. It means that sometimes the weapon you bring matters more than how many opponents you face. Dr. Petrov activated a new set of displays that made Zekthara's 4 eyes widen in shock. The screens showed weapon systems unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive constructions that seemed to dwarf entire space stations. Ladies, gentlemen, and allied representatives, Dr. Petrov announced, may I present Project Damocles. The holographic display showed a series of installations hidden throughout the Sol system, each one containing what could only be described as a cannon of impossible size. These are stellar mass drivers, Dr. Petrov explained. Each one is capable of accelerating projectiles to approximately 30% of light speed. The projectiles themselves are guided kinetic penetrators with enough mass to core a planet. Admiral Slack's image wavered as her own shock became apparent. Admiral Chun, these weapons, they could destroy entire fleets with single shots. That's the idea, Admiral Chen replied calmly. We've been building them since our first contact with hostile aliens. They're our ultimate defensive measure. General Kekstani's hologram laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. Humans build weapons that could crack worlds, then call them defensive measures. I approve of this philosophy. Zekthara found her voice. Admiral, weapons of this magnitude, surely there are treaties, conventions, galactic accords that govern their development. Ambassador, Admiral Chun interrupted gently. We're not party to any of those agreements. And, more importantly, every species that signed those agreements did so from a position of safety, protected by distance and Federation peacekeeping forces. She gestured to the Alliance representatives surrounding them. These people have been murdered and enslaved while those treaties were in effect. They've learned that agreements are only as good as the people willing to enforce them. Admiral HFY Stories spoke up from her projection. Ambassador Zekthara, with respect to the Federation, your peacekeeping forces have never been tested against a determined, well-armed enemy. The Vakthari have been running unopposed raids for centuries because no one has ever hit back hard enough to make them stop. But, surely, Zekthara protested, the use of such extreme weapons will escalate conflicts throughout the galaxy. Other species will feel compelled to develop similar systems. Good, Admiral Chun said simply. Let them. An armed galaxy is a polite galaxy. Dr. Kim pulled up historical data from Earth's past. Ambassador, human history is full of examples where the development of overwhelming defensive weapons actually reduced the frequency of conflicts. When the cost of attacking becomes too high, most aggressors find other ways to resolve their differences. But what about species like the Vactheri, who can't be reasoned with? Admiral Chen's expression grew cold. Species like the Vactheri serve as object lessons for everyone else about what happens when you choose predation over cooperation. The briefing continued with technical details that made Zekthara's head spin. Humans had developed not just massive weapons, but entirely new approaches to space combat. Their ships were designed to operate independently, with each vessel capable of taking on multiple opponents. Their crews trained constantly in simulation environments that recreated every known form of alien technology and tactics. But perhaps most impressive was their intelligence network. Through their growing alliance system, humans had access to real-time information about Vactheri fleet movements throughout the galaxy. The main force is assembling at the Kethvar yards, reported Captain Lisa Zhang from Intelligence. Current count is 2,347 ships, including their Fortress-class dreadnoughts and several vessels of unknown configuration. General Kekstani's image growled approval. Unknown vessels usually mean they're bringing their best weapons. Vactheri do not innovate often, but when they do, it is to kill more efficiently. Admiral Chun studied the intelligence reports. Time to arrival? Based on their observed hyperspace signatures, approximately 18 days. Excellent. That gives us time to complete final preparations. Admiral Chun turned to address the assembled alliance representatives. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored allies, in 18 days we're going to face the largest Vactheri fleet ever assembled. They're coming here to make an example of humanity that will terrify the galaxy into submission. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of beings from dozens of different species, all united by their determination to end the Vactheri threat. Instead, we're going to make an example of them. When this is over, the name Vactheri is going to be a footnote in galactic history, and the name humanity is going to mean something very different to the galaxy's predators. Admiral HFY Slack spoke for all the allied representatives. Admiral Chun, our people have waited generations for this opportunity. We stand with humanity, and we will see this through to the end. As the briefing broke up and representatives began returning to their ships and commands, Zekthara remained behind with Dr. Kim and Admiral Chen. Admiral, she said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Of course. When this battle is over, assuming humanity and your allies are victorious, what then? You'll have demonstrated that you can destroy any threat in the galaxy. What's to stop humanity from becoming the next predator species? Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the question seriously. Ambassador, that's a fair concern, and it's one we've discussed extensively. The answer is simple. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We want to live in it safely. Dr. Kim nodded. Our species has learned the hard way that empires built on conquest inevitably collapse. We're not interested in controlling other civilizations. We're interested in making sure no one can control us. But power corrupts, Zekthara persisted. Every species that has achieved military dominance has eventually used it to exploit others. Admiral Chin smiled, and for the first time since Zekthara had known her, it was a completely warm expression. Ambassador, that's exactly why we're building alliances instead of an empire. Every species in our coalition has veto power over our actions. If humanity ever starts acting like the Vactheri, our allies have the ability and the motivation to stop us. She gestured toward the displays, still showing the positions of allied fleets. We're not just building a military alliance. We're building a mutual defense network where everyone has a stake in keeping everyone else honest. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than letting predators run wild while hoping diplomacy will save you. Zekthara realized that in all her years of diplomatic training, no one had ever taught her to deal with a species that combined overwhelming military capability with apparently genuine restraint. Humans were rewriting the rules of galactic civilization, and she was beginning to understand that those new rules might actually be better than the old ones. 18 days, she said finally. 18 days, Admiral Chen agreed. Ambassador, would you like to observe the battle from our command center? Zekthara thought about the massive Vactheri fleet approaching Sol space, and about the weapons humans had prepared to meet them. She thought about the alliance of species united in their determination to end centuries of predation and terror. Most of all, she thought about the fact that she was about to witness something that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Yes, she said, I think I would. The VAC theory arrived exactly when human intelligence predicted they would. Ambassador Zektheros stood in the primary command center of Luna Base 7, watching as 2,347 hostile contacts materialized on the tactical display. The enemy fleet was so large that the holographic projection had to be scaled down significantly just to fit within the room. By the eternal void, Mortex whispered beside her. There are so many of them. Admiral Chun stood at the center of the command center, calmly reviewing final status reports as if she faced fleets this size every day. Around her, human officers maintained their characteristic composure, their voices steady and professional despite the magnitude of what they faced. All defensive installations report ready status, Lieutenant Morrison announced. Project Damocles is online and standing by. Allied fleets have assumed designated positions. Excellent, Admiral Chen replied. Signal all units that we are now operating under Combat Protocol Alpha. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on all VAC theory vessels. Zekthera had learned that Combat Protocol Alpha was the human designation for total war. No quarter asked or given, no limitations on weapons or tactics, and no mercy for enemies who refuse to surrender. It was a level of warfare that most species had never contemplated, let alone prepared for. The communication display activated, showing the familiar reptilian features of a VAC theory commander, though this one wore more elaborate armor than the war leader they had faced 3 months earlier. Humans, the VAC theory said, his voice carrying absolute confidence. I am Supreme War Leader Esiskeverin of the Crimson Throne. You destroyed a VAC theory fleet. This insult cannot be tolerated. Admiral Chen stepped forward. Supreme War Leader, I am Admiral Sarah Chun, commanding the Solar Defense Forces. Your forces are in violation of human space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. SSK Varen's expression showed what might have been amusement. Admiral Chun, you face the might of the entire VAC theory empire. Over 2,000 ships carry enough firepower to reduce your worlds to ash. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Counter-offer, Admiral Chen replied pleasantly. Turn around and leave, and you might live long enough to regret coming here. The VAC theory commander's eyes narrowed. You cannot be serious. Our fleet is the largest ever assembled. Your pathetic alliance cannot field even 1/10 our numbers. Admiral Chen's smile was cold enough to freeze stellar plasma. Supreme War Leader, you're absolutely right. We can't match your numbers. She paused for effect. We don't need to. Before SSK Varen could respond, Admiral Chun cut the transmission and turned to address the command center. Ladies and gentlemen, the enemy has declined our generous offer of safe passage. General Rodriguez, you are authorized to begin Operation Götterdämmerung. Zektheroff felt a chill at the name. She had learned enough human history to know that Götterdämmerung meant twilight of the gods, the end of everything. The first phase of the human response was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Instead of moving to engage the enemy fleet directly, human ships throughout the Sol system simply disappeared. Not destroyed, vanished. One moment, they were visible on sensors. The next, they were gone as if they had never existed. Stealth systems active, reported Dr. Petrov from his technical station. All fleet elements are now running silent. On the tactical display, the VAC theory fleet began its approach toward the inner system, expecting to meet human forces in traditional battle formations. Instead, they found empty space. SSK Varen's image reappeared, clearly confused. Umans, where are your fleets? Do you think hiding will save you? Admiral Chun ignored the transmission entirely. Colonel Williams, status of Allied forces? All Allied fleets report ready. Admiral THY Seslak signals that Air Thani forces are in position. General Kextani confirms Hrothgar battle groups are standing by. The Veltheri crystalline ships are prepared for coordinated assault. Zekthera realized that while human ships had vanished, the Allied fleets remained visible. But they weren't positioned where traditional military doctrine would suggest. Instead of forming defensive lines around key installations, they were scattered throughout the system in small groups. Admiral, she said quietly, your allies are badly outnumbered and separated. Surely you should concentrate your forces? Admiral Chen's eyes never left the tactical display. Ambassador, watch and learn. The Vaktheri fleet was now 3 hours into the system, moving in a massive formation designed to intimidate enemies and overwhelm defensive positions. They flew with the confidence of predators who had never faced serious opposition. That confidence lasted exactly 17 minutes and 32 seconds into the engagement. The attack began simultaneously from everywhere at once. Human ships materialized from stealth positions directly within the Vaktheri formation, their weapons already firing. Allied vessels struck from unexpected angles, coordinating their assault with precision that suggested months of training together. And from hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt, Project Damocles opened fire. Zekthera watched in stunned amazement as relativistic projectiles lanced through space at significant fractions of light speed. Each shot was precisely targeted, designed not to destroy enemy ships, but to cripple them in specific ways. Engine compartments exploded. Weapon systems went offline. Shield generators overloaded and died. But it was the human fleet's behavior that truly amazed her. Their ships moved like schools of predatory fish, attacking in coordinated groups before vanishing back into stealth. They struck at exactly the right moment, hit exactly the right targets, and disappeared before the Vaktheri could respond effectively. How are they coordinating without communications? Mortex asked, his bioluminescence strobing with excitement and fear. Dr. Kim answered from her observation station. They're not coordinating exactly. They're executing predetermined plans based on enemy reactions. Every human captain knows exactly what to do in any given situation. But that's impossible, Zekthera protested. No plan survives contact with the enemy. Admiral Chen glanced at her briefly. Ambassador, that's true if you're trying to control a battle. We're not trying to control it. We're trying to win it. The difference became clear as the engagement continued. The Vaktheri were fighting like most galactic military forces. Rigid formations, centralized command, predictable tactics. The humans and their allies were fighting like a pack of intelligent predators, each element independent but all working toward the same goal. Supreme War Leader SSK Varen appeared again, his composure cracking as reports of damage flooded his command ship. This is impossible. How can you coordinate such precise attacks without communications? Admiral Chun finally answered the transmission. Supreme War Leader, we call it initiative. Every human commander is trained to think independently while maintaining focus on the overall mission. We don't need orders because we all understand the objective. Make your fleet stop existing. The Vaktheri formation was beginning to collapse as ships found themselves under attack from all directions simultaneously. Their numerical advantage was becoming a liability as damaged vessels collided with each other, and concentrated formations became easy targets for human precision fire. Admiral, reported Captain Zhang from intelligence. Enemy fleet cohesion is down to 40% and falling. They're starting to break formation. Excellent. Signal Admiral Harrison aboard the Unconquerable. He is authorized to begin Phase 2. Zekthera had learned to dread what human Phase 2 operations entailed. New contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Human ships that had been hidden so completely that even friendly sensors hadn't detected them. These vessels were different from the first wave attackers. Larger, more heavily armed, and apparently designed for a very specific purpose. Meet the Terra-class dreadnoughts, Dr. Petrov said with obvious pride. Each one is essentially a mobile fortress with enough firepower to level a continent. The Terra-class ships moved into the heart of the Vaktheri formation and began systematically destroying everything within range. Their weapons weren't the precise surgical instruments used by smaller human vessels. They were hammers designed to break large things into smaller pieces. Admiral Thichvislax's image appeared on the communication display. Admiral Chun, Airthani forces request permission to begin our attack run. Permission granted, Admiral. Happy hunting. The Allied attack was devastating in its precision. Each species brought different capabilities to the fight. Airthani ships with their phase-shifting technology that allowed them to attack from multiple dimensions simultaneously, Hrothgar vessels built like flying fortresses, and crewed by warriors who viewed battle as the highest form of art, Velthari crystalline ships that could resonate enemy hulls apart at the molecular level. But it was the coordination between all these different forces that truly stunned Zekthera. Somehow, humans had managed to integrate dozens of different military doctrines, technologies, and cultural approaches to warfare into a single, coherent assault that exploited every weakness in Vactheri tactics. How, she asked aloud, how did you manage to coordinate so many different species into a unified fighting force? Dr. Kim looked up from her analysis displays. The same way humans have always won wars, Ambassador. We adapt faster than our enemies do. On the tactical display, the Vactheri fleet was disintegrating. Ships were fleeing in all directions, abandoning formation discipline in favor of individual survival. But they quickly discovered that the humans had anticipated this as well. Escape routes were blocked by hidden minefields. Predetermined hyperspace jump points were covered by human ships waiting in ambush. Even the Vactheri's emergency fallback positions had been anticipated and prepared for. Supreme War Leader SS Gavarin made one final transmission, his ship clearly dying around him. Humans, what manner beings are you? How can you fight with such precision? How can you predict our every move? Admiral Chun leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of human history. Supreme War Leader, we are the species that learned warfare from predators more dangerous than you can imagine. We fought each other for thousands of years, and every lesson was paid for in blood. We studied every form of violence, every strategy, every tactic that thinking beings could devise. The displays around her showed the complete collapse of the Vactheri fleet. But, more importantly, we learned that the most effective way to wage